Hello. It is, oh my goodness, it is the 21st of May, 2025, and Memorial Day is coming up very quickly. And I realized that already on Memorial Day, or I should say the 25th of May, which is actually Sunday. Memorial Day is Monday, but the 25th of May, this Sunday, is the 11th anniversary of Lee Chamberlain's death, of her crossing over. She died at 76 years old in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, surrounded by family. And so I wanted to come and, remember her. I'm not going to be able to do it exactly, on the day, but we are in the vicinity, and that is what matters. So on the last edition, I read a letter of hers, all the way back from May 2nd, 1973. That's also posted on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. Welcome back, and thank you. To introduce myself properly, my name is Erica Chamberlain, and I am Lee Chamberlain's daughter. And I wanted to start to, really kind of unearth her legacy, and I'm doing it from another perspective, from going through her letters and reading her letters and talking more about, her more personal journey in terms of her career, and obviously also touching on some things in her personal life as well. As I may have mentioned before, I have some of the letters here, and there are gaps because a lot of the letters are currently tucked away somewhere. So when I was searching today, the 25th of June, 1976, that's a 3-year gap between the previous letter. And in that 3-year period, quite a lot of things happened. But I don't want to, I don't want to not do something. I want to try and be as consistent as possible. And later on, I will be taking a trip and, retrieving more letters, and then that should help with, just with the timeline, the continuity, but there's still a lot to talk about. So I'm going to be reading this letter today, which is written to her friend, Susan Picard, and then I'm going to bring up, some of the works or some of the things that she was involved in around the time period that she's speaking on, which will this will make more sense to you once I actually start reading the letter. So I hope you're well. I appreciate you being here, and give a thumbs up, give a subscribe, leave a comment. It's all appreciated. My intention is to grow this channel. Okay. Dear Susan, I did not intend to allow so much time to elapse before answering. I was so pleasantly surprised to hear from you. This is the end of my 6th week in sweltering sunny California, and the time has flown. I got right back to work, talking to agents, and with Sydney's help, landed an A1 ace. He's the kind of agent whose breed is almost extinct, a personal manager/agent. In any case, bref, the movie I was to begin August 1st has been delayed, but the next one starts in March. Meanwhile, we're seeing what guest slots we can get on the Big Eye, which is, of course, a nickname for TV. So professionally, things are moving apace. Dan was just here in early June, and the children were in Pacific Grove near Monterey at the same time. They joined me in LA excuse me, sometimes my mother's handwriting is a little bit hard to decipher. They joined me in LA for another 10 days. Dan came back while they were still here. Now they're in New York to go to camp July 1st. I expect that Dan will be back at least twice more, once in July and once in August. It's a little nutty, but it's always been nutty. It's so hot, 100 to 106 degrees Fahrenheit the past week, that the paper keeps sticking to my hands. Aside from the traveling Chamberlains, I've had to move from my loving shelter in Pacific Palisades. The youngest daughter married a Lebanese in February and were evacuated rather suddenly, arriving here on Wednesday. Since a Vietnamese family is also in residence there, rooms were getting scarce and I had to move. So I'm a new guest with an old friend from New York who settled here. They're very gracious, but the Palisades family is special. I've succeeded in finding a house for very little money for mid-July thanks to my current hostess. Although the move from the Palisades was abrupt, war is hell, things have worked out nicely. The children left Wednesday, the 23rd of June, instead of Sunday, the 27th, due to the change in events, but they both said they were glad to go home to New York, even though they had had a terrific time. Bernard was my first thought when I read of the CUNY events, meaning the City University of New York. I trust things have worked out now. The last I read, funds seemed forthcoming, right or wrong. I don't think I'll see you in Red Hook since the TV season is hot during July and August. Dan will be a single parent in July, visiting day, and we plan to solicit my father's services as grandparent rep in August visiting day, since Dan must be in California that day. Perhaps one day we'll be together like a, quote, normal family, unquote. Hélas. That's the news. Up to date. Write again. Use the same Marigny Lane address, since I hadn't planned to change my mailing address, although my physical body has been moved elsewhere. That is still home to me. I plan to go there frequently. I send my love to you and Bernard and the kids. Have a great summer. Love, Lee. Now, as I read this, I feel like, my goodness, did I read this letter already the last time? I think there's some... In my memory, there's some overlap here, or maybe it's just my memories of what was going on at this time. All right, so let's break it down. So it's June 25th, 1976, and in terms of her career, the last thing that she's done was Let's Do It Again, which was released in 1975, right? So during the filming of Uptown Saturday Night and Let's Do It Again, my mother, or Lee, left New York, and she spent a really long time during the shooting of each film to be on set, because films can take months and months and months to shoot. And my recollection was that she was gone at least 6 months at a time. So, we, sort of decided, eventually my parents were going to decide to move us out, to the West Coast, right? Just in an attempt to keep us all together and not go through these long separations. So you'll notice, or you may have noticed here, in the beginning of this letter, she says that thanks to Sydney, referring to Sydney Poitier, that she was able to get an A1 agent or a manager agent, which is what it used to be like, you know, back in the day. If you could get someone who did both, that was great, because it meant that it could mean that the person really kind of understood you, you know, as a whole. And in general, a manager is willing to take on a client in a deeper way than someone who's just an agent, right? When you think of musicians, you know, you think of those types of dynamics more often. Like Jeff Buckley comes to mind, for example, and his manager, because it forms a deeper relationship, and you have an understanding, and the manager can have an understanding of where to move the career and take the career of their particular artist. Now, she does not mention the name of this manager agent in this letter. So this is something that may come up in a future letter. So stay tuned. It's very interesting reading these letters, because it's like being a detective, where you have to do some sleuthing, sort of connect the dots, jogging your memory, and going back through records, you know, of various sorts, public records and so on, to put together the timeline. So I feel like in some ways I'm very tuned in to what Lee did, but in other ways, you know, she was just my mom. So again, you know, of course it's her own life, so she knows what she's talking about here. So she doesn't necessarily feel the need, you know, to spill out everything in minute detail, but from the perspective of a fan, or a perspective of, you know, an erstwhile biographer like myself, you know, these are details that we're wanting to have. They will come to light eventually. Okay, so moving on, speaking of details, in the next line she says, in any case, bref, the movie was to begin August 1st, has been delayed, but the next one starts in March. I don't know what movie she's referring to here. She makes no mention of it by name. And again, you know, she already has 2 movies under her belt, right? So this is a mystery to me. However, she's got something going on in March. It's unclear from this whether she's talking about a movie or whether she's talking about a TV movie. So, you know, back in the 70s, these made-for-TV movies became very, very popular. And actually that rolled out for quite some time. But again, we don't have any indication here of what she's referring to, because she's not naming it. All right. Now, since she does mention what other guest slots we can get on the big I, so professionally things are moving apace. So this was the only clue that I really had, guest slots. So I went ahead and I looked up on the IMDb, which is the International Movie Database that Lee is on, just to see what was going on in this time period. And the first thing that came up was All's Fair. Now, this was a TV series that ran from the 20th of September of 1976 to April 30th of 1977. This letter is dated June 25th of 1976. So this letter was actually written 3 months before this episode or this television series aired of All's Fair. It starred Richard Crenna, Bernadette Peters and Lee Chamberlain. Mom was given star billing on this. I'm sure because of the fact that she had just come off, a major motion picture beforehand with Sidney Poitier. Now, the creators of All's Fair was Norman Lear, right, who did a lot of great shows, another gentleman named Bob Schiller, and someone else named Rod Parker. It was filmed at a place called Metro Media Square, which was located at 5746 Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. And altogether, there were 24 episodes. Bernadette Peters was actually nominated for a Golden Globe. So that's interesting. And I remember when she was filming this, I remember at the time we were actually living, if I'm not mistaken, I believe we were living in San Francisco. So you can already tell, she's referring to us as the traveling Chamberlains in this letter. There was a lot of bouncing around, trying to coordinate everyone's schedules, work obligations that were taking people from one coast to another. There was just a lot of moving around. I could be mistaken about us being in San Francisco at this time. There was so much that went on in this time period. Now, in my mind, because she's referring us to being glad to go home back to New York, but in 1977, we would make another move and we would actually move to San Francisco. And this was, my parents' attempt to, sort of keep us all together, or at least keep us all in the same state as a family. And it was also a decision and a compromise because no one really wanted to live in Los Angeles, but San Francisco was a short commute away from LA by plane. Now, other guest appearances that she made in this time period, there was a show that came out in 1977 that was called James at 16. That she played someone named Mrs Hazeltine, and she was in one episode. And that the star of that show was someone named Lance Kerwin, who was a child actor. Lance apparently died in 2023 in San Clemente, California. He's left 4 children behind. Apparently he was married twice. So rest in peace, Lance Kerwin. But that was in 1977. Another guest appearance she made in 1977 was on the very, very popular show, What's Happening, right? So if you know, you know. That was an extremely popular show. That was one episode. The name of the show was called Bill Gets Married. And the people on the show was someone named Bill Walker, Danielle Spencer, and Thalmus Rasulala. So I'll post these. I'll post some photos later if you're here on Facebook or if you're on YouTube on the community tab, because there's a nice photo of her, in her wedding garb with the groom on this episode. In 1978, she played a character named Jenny Davis on Lou Grant. Now, Lou Grant was a spin-off that starred Ed Asner, because you'll remember the show, right, Mary Tyler Moore, and Mary Tyler Moore was a reporter, and Lou, Mr. Grant, that was her boss, and then there was Ted. What a funny show that was. So eventually, Ed Asner would actually have his own spin-off, again, of this show, which was also very popular, and Lou Grant was a very beloved, Ed Asner, I should say, was a very beloved actor. and that show went on for quite some time. Then in 1978, she played the character of a Dr. Chisolm on a TV movie called The Long Journey Back. I'd never heard of this movie before. So this was the thing about Lee, is that she worked a lot, and some things she would mention, or some things we would definitely know that she was in, and then there were other things that she did that I guess she didn't really think that much of it, so she didn't really mention it. Perhaps this was, it was sometimes you need a gig. So when I looked at the IMDb, it looks like a saga of a young lady, a schoolgirl, who goes through an accident, who has a horrific accident, and then is trying to put her life back together again. So you can look that up for yourself. And I will also I'll post a link in the comments to IMDb, and maybe some of you remember this movie. Maybe some of you remember seeing this movie. So perhaps that is the movie that she's referring to. It's hard to know because, again, she doesn't mention anything by name. Then she goes on, right, to mention, and I think I've mentioned this in the previous video, of how much she loved staying at Raoul and Didi Magana's home in the Pacific Palisades. They had a lovely home. The home originally had been owned by Deanna Durbin, the Hollywood star, and they had that home and lived in that home for a very long time, tucked away. Glad to say that it's still standing. Thank you, Ginger Rosser, for looking that up for me, because all the terrible things that happened during these fires in Pacific Palisades, a lot of people lost their homes. At any rate, as she explains in this letter, she had to leave because essentially there was a full house, right? And then she goes into, some description about how her husband, my father, Daniel Chamberlain, was out there in early June, and we were staying in Pacific Grove in Monterey. I remember that. And then, there was more back and forth, and then we must have visited Mom there in LA for a little while, and then Dad came back, and then we left, and we went back to go to New York because we were going to summer camp. We used to go to a camp called Hillcroft, which was located in Billings, New York, which, who knows, that it still might be running. It was a family-owned, operated summer camp. A lot of fond memories of being there. Okay, so then she goes on to describe how incredibly hot it was in California, right? 100 to 106 degrees. And she's mentioning the paper is sticking because she didn't typewrite this letter. She wrote this letter by hand. So there's her script. And it's amazing to me how even it is and how it is in a straight line across the paper. If this were me, it would be going up or it would be going down at this point. But when she grew up, you actually had to take penmanship in school. She went to a Catholic school, and she took penmanship, and there's the benefits of penmanship right there. Okay. Let me see now. What else can I say? Again, she kind of goes into more detail because she loved being there so much, about Pacific Palisades and, basically two different sets of people that are there who were there, you know, just because of different wars, right? Different things going on, and they had to like leave in a hurry. So I had mentioned this before. The Maganyas were very charitable people, and they had actually sponsored a Vietnamese family who I believe were some of the boat people that were coming from Vietnam. It's crazy just to think of what those people went through. And you may recall that they had made a very elaborate dinner, you know, as a thank you to the Maganyas for that. And then again, as I said, she mentions their daughter Danielle and their husband, and they had to leave in a hurry, I guess in February of 1976, because there was some violence, you know, putting their lives in danger, and they had to evacuate and leave Lebanon in a hurry. Then she talks about, she mentioned the current events that was happening in 1976 of CUNY, which stands for the City University of New York. So Bernard Picard must have been teaching there, and funds, you know, must have been in question whether the school was going to get funded or not. And of course, if the school's not funded or not, the instructors aren't going to be able to work. The professors aren't going to be able to work. So if you look back in time and you remember what was happening in New York City in the late 70s, in this period, the city was basically bankrupt. There was a famous headline of President Ford. It said, "Ford says to city, drop dead." That was that was a headline in the New York papers, where basically he refused to assist New York City and give it any funding whatsoever. We had a very, very corrupt mayor, Mayor Abe Beame, and yeah, it was some hard times. We got through it, but it was a rough period there. So that's what that is referring to. The Picards used to have a home in Red Hook. So I'm thinking that Susan Picard must have extended an invitation to come visit for the summer. But Lee is saying, you know, this is when all the auditions are for. That happen in July and August. So why it may be physically uncomfortable to be in LA during that time period, it is the hiring season. So if you want to get hired as a working actor, you've got to stick around. Again, then she makes another reference to her husband, Dan, basically, you know, being a single dad for this time period, although my brother and I were going to be in summer camp, so maybe he didn't have it too bad. It wasn't like he was having to cook for us 3 times a day or anything like that. And then also enlisting my grandfather, Bernardo Lopalo, to come visit us up at camp. Now, I do seem to have a memory of Bernardo coming to visit us there, driving up in that station wagon of his. Okay. All right. Then again, she makes this comment about, you know, maybe one day we'll all be together, right? Like a normal family. She concludes by saying, "That's my news. Susan, write again soon. And if you do write me, just keep using the same address in Pacific Palisades." You know, that's basically, she's going to be using that as her P.O. box. And also that gave her a much wanted pretext or an excuse to go visit by picking up her mail and going there frequently. And I seem to remember this also. You know, I remember my mother saying to me, "I have to go pick up my mail. I have to go pick up my mail." And she concludes by sending her love to Bernard and the kids and wishing them a great summer. So that is it. So this is just a small segment in time where we're doing a little sleuthing and able to maybe try and piece together, again, what these guest spots were during this time period. Because, of course, you know, when you film something, when you're in production and you film something, it's not like today where basically we can do what we're doing now and I can just live stream thing and it's available immediately. Back in those days, you'd film something and then it would have to go to the editor. It would have to be edited. It would have to be put together. The credits would have to be put on it. And then there would be an official air date and all of that. So there would be a delay in between filming something and it actually being aired on screen. So I'm going to save the other appearances that she would have made in the 70s until the next letter. But I just wanted to share a little bit more about Lee's thought process, Lee's career, Lee's lifestyle, which you can see the lifestyle of an entertainer is demanding, and it can find you, separated from your family. One thing that Lee definitely had on the ball was amazing organization skills, that she was able to keep track of everyone and everywhere and keep everything juggling and, trying to, she was such a good mom, try to keep everything, as stable and in the flow of life as we were accustomed to. It's commendable here that even though there was a lot of things to manage and a lot of things to take care of and sort of a lot of uncertainty in terms of her own career and then her living arrangement and then having to move suddenly and then basically camping out at someone's house and then trying to find another place to live and then being available to go on castings while keeping track of her children and what we were doing and her husband and all of that. She really was amazing. She really was an amazing person. So I just want to express my appreciation for you, Mom, by coming on here today. For all of you watching, I hope that you had a wonderful Mother's Day, whether you're a mother or a grandmother, or maybe just remembering your own mother. And I want to wish you a very happy Memorial Day weekend. I hope that you get a chance to spend time with people that you love in a pleasant setting. And I will be back again soon for another episode of Lee's Letters. Bye-bye.